Dear church, let's talk about the FillIn Preacher. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley, joined by my friend Jake Sledge once again. I don't know if they're getting tired of us, but hopefully they can last for another week or two as we're talking about ministry matters, preaching matters, and things associated with preaching. And so we want to talk today about the FillIn Preacher, a topic that we don't really get into too much, but what's it like when the preacher's gone and you're the guy that's called on to fill in? There's a lot of challenges with that, and I want to talk a little bit about those challenges and maybe some tips for the person who is filling in. You're a guy that fills that role quite a bit. When I'm gone, you're tasked with filling in for me, you along with one of our other ministers, but it's always you, and I know that we kind of flip-flop whether you do Sunday morning or Sunday night. So I wanted to hear kind of what your feelings are, your thoughts about being the fill-in preacher. What are some of the challenges that you face when I'm gone?
Well, I keep a running list in Evernote of ideas, whether it's a topic or a scripture, and for classes and sermons. So I've got a lot of stuff there, and you're really good about. I mean, I'll know, a couple of months at least, usually in advance. But always when that day comes, it's like, oh no. So, when time comes to really start. So what works for me is, and we're going to talk about it, is when I get that date, go ahead and I use Evernote to go ahead and start building just kind of some thoughts. I select that topic, and that helps me go ahead and lock that in, and I feel better on it. Then it's kind of just marinating and cooking, until, if you're not quite going to really get started on it until at least you know where you're going, and it kind of sitting there in the back of your mind for a little bit. But you, there, in our case, and for a lot of people nowadays, you're thinking, well, there's visitors online, there's people viewing online, there's people in person, various things like that. So you want to be just kind of mindful of the whole dynamic that's happening. And then there's coordinating with the sound guys, and you're not just walking in and being there. You've got to get the mic and sound and slides, and
it's like a production company every week now with the live streaming. You send in your PowerPoint and your lessons. So because we, at Oldham Lane, we have somebody run the PowerPoint, so we don't click our own slides and all that. So you send in the notes. If I'm out of town and going to be for an extended period, you come and do the TV program that we do every week, and so there's a lot to go into that.
Well, we put stuff in the bulletin, and the secretary needs that a little bit in advance.
Right.
So, we'll talk about preparation, but the way we operate is you can't wait till the last minute. You have to lock in certain things within that time frame.
I know that you like to know quite a bit in advance, and so I'm always going to take a couple of vacation Sundays every year. One of them is set every year around Christmas time, whatever Sunday that is. I take off and go back home for the holidays, so that one's set. But there's always one in the summer that I take. I'm usually gone for like Red River Family Encampment. That's a yearly thing for me, as well as maybe a couple of gospel meetings a year or whatever it might be. You always like to know those, and I always try to give those to you up front, so you do have quite a bit of notice. I think that's a key in meeting the challenge, is giving plenty of notice, because we're not just talking about churches that have a large staff and somebody fills in when the preacher's gone. We're talking about, guys that maybe at smaller congregations that they only have one minister on staff, and when he's gone, they call on somebody in the congregation, a deacon or maybe an elder or somebody to come in and fill in. And so having that advance notice is always key. I think another challenge is that, when you don't do this week in and week out, people tell me, they say, I don't know how you do it, how you do this week in and week out and coming up with lessons and all that kind of thing. And I always remind them, well, I get paid to do this. This is my job, and it's my only job. Yes, I have other things that I tend to during the week, but coming up with sermons week in and week out does get easier when you've done this for a longer period of time. The person that's saying that is usually someone who has to come up with a lesson here and there along with their other job or jobs that they do during the week, raising kids as well and family and all that kind of stuff. So it's important to have that advance notice, but it's also important to get a jump on things and not wait till the last minute because there are so many other things competing for your time. Whereas for me, I can get in my office, I can shut the door, and that's the only thing that I have to tend to, on a weekly basis. So it does get easier for me. I think another challenge is being able to do this while balancing everything else in your life, like we've already said, and also being able to come up with something. Choosing a topic. I mean, when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm going to be out of town, such and such week. I want you to fill in for me." Your first thought is, "Okay, well, what am I going to preach on?" I mean, what do you do there as far as filling it? How do you come up with a topic?
Well, I keep that running list of ideas, and it might be something from my own Bible study where I'll make a note of, "Man, I really like that. That you could really preach that," and also keep in mind. And I recommend doing that, but keep in mind that you need to think in terms of a one-shot sermon.
Okay.
And that's different than a series, which you get to do. So when we fill in, we don't get the luxury of a one-shot of a series.
Right.
So you've got to think this is a standalone lesson that needs to just be on its own. So don't leave them hanging because you can't do anything else.
Right.
So you
Not
need
a
to
cliffhanger.
You need to go in and just do that lesson. So don't do something too big. Do something you can zero in on and leave with the people that will edify them, that will be healthy and good, challenging. That's good. I think of it as if you're serving a meal to somebody. Typically, you think, well, there's vegetables, there's meat, there's sides on but give them some meat. You need to serve some meat, but at the same time, you're the fill-in guy. And for many times, like you said, this is not someone else who's on staff. This is a member, someone who's adding it on top of everything else. So don't jump in to the deep end. You don't have to, but serve a nice meal to the people. So you need some meat. Don't just feed them dessert.
Right.
That's not healthy, and that doesn't do you justice either. That's almost, let somebody else preach. So you need to give substance, but don't get into something that's so tough that you can't figure out and you can't do justice within the time frame that you have.
Right.
So pick something that's simple enough, but not too superficial, that sort of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point, a one-shot deal, because, I operate within series. And so you're coming in and you're trying to just do something that I wouldn't say tides people over till Chris gets back, but you're trying to do something independently of the series, something that presents God's word and message in a very relatable way, an applicable way, and something that they can ingest and take with them as a one-shot deal. Let me ask you this. Do you prefer that I give you a topic or that you just be able to do your own thing?
I prefer doing my own, but I don't know what most people it might help, or some might help. And that might be a tip for the preacher, is to ask the fill-in person what they would like.
Yeah. Because
the preacher probably has plenty that they could suggest, and one that's fitting for the person in terms of study and prep.
Yeah, I just wonder because, at Oldham Lane, we have done year-long studies on Sunday mornings, even Sunday nights. And so, like, we did the His Word and we did the One Word series, devotional series. And I just wonder when I'm out of town and it comes to that point in the year-long series, was it easier for you to go with whatever the topic already was for that Sunday? Or did you say, man, I wish I got to choose my own because I don't like having it picked for me?
In those cases, because it was in advance, and I can't remember exactly what those topics were, but I remember that if it were something that I needed more study on or whatever, or I needed, just maybe more time to work through, let's say it was something a little more advanced for the fill-in person, well, to know that in advance really helps. Yeah. Because now you can start maybe earlier than you normally would have. But so I've been fine with those. I think of 3 or 4 years ago, we had during our summer series, that one summer we had 2 guys like the day of couldn't make it.
Yes.
And so I filled in and wanted to do the topic that we had assigned for them, which that was a good challenge to do, and I think it went fine. But you don't want to do that all the time. You can do that in a pinch.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about. Is that something I wanted to get to? Is when you don't have advance notice, because you're referring to our summer series. Like a lot of churches in Texas, every Wednesday night during the summer, we bring in a guest speaker, and they speak on whatever the topic is. Like this summer, we're concentrating on the fruit of the Spirit, and so each aspect of the fruit of the Spirit, we have a guest speaker taking that. So it was a couple of years ago, and our good friend Jacob Hawk was on his way. He was in Wichita Falls at the time. He was on his way here on a Wednesday night. Wichita Falls is about 2 hours from us. He was on his way here, and his car broke down. And you had offered to go and pick him up and bring him on into town, but it was just one of those things where he was too far away. He wasn't close enough to Abilene. You were going to have to drive an hour and a half just to go pick him up. And so we decided, hey, we'll have you another time. You're gonna pinch hit, and you had really no advanced warning, and the topic at hand was, I don't remember even now what the topic was, but that happened twice that summer. That you had to fill in. You don't always get advance notice. What's your approach then?
Well, there was a topic, and so I just tried to zero in on the topic, and you
with how much notice? What, 2 hours?
Yeah. Well, in that case, it was a couple of hours. So the other one, I think I had a little more most of that day, but you've got to block out the clutter, and you've got to zero in on what's the topic, and don't overcomplicate it. And just deliver a good meal, a good message to the people. And so just zero in on a passage, a couple of passages. You don't have to jump all over the place. You don't have to, just do, you're not doing a commentary on the topic or the scripture.
Right.
You want to educate, you want to teach, preach. And so the more in your mind, don't freak out, just calm down, simplify this, zero in. And that's typically what I do in a sermon anyway, even in a class, is I want to zero in on that one big idea.
Right.
And when you do that, that helps you cut through. So in a passage, there might be 15 things that you could get into, directions you could go, but what are you going to do? At the end of the day, you've got to say something. What's that one thing you're going to say?
Where are you going to land the plane?
Not everybody agrees with that. They want to have 3 points, 6 points, and all that, and maybe you have a couple of points within that. But the way I do it is, what's that one idea, that one message I want to communicate that they walk away with saying, I preached yesterday out of town. The whole message was, the passage was Hebrews 6:9-12, but the message was be an imitator. Be an imitation of people that have gone before us, faithful Christians and of Christ. Be an imitation. So there's a lot you can do within that passage, but I wanted one thing to be said. So that helps if you'll do that.
It brings me to another point, and it is that your preparation isn't always just about for that sermon on that week, that this is something you're preparing for always. And I think that's important, that if you're going to be a fill-in guy wherever you're at, it's important to always be studying, always be, preparing, whether that's by paying attention to what's going on around you, different illustrations that may pop up during a day, and kind of jot them down, have a notepad, or use your iPad or your phone or whatever and make notes, and that way you always have something to pull from. I think where folks really feel intimidated by this is they get asked to fill in and they're just starting from zero.
Absolute zero.
Absolute
nothing
zero.
Up here.
Right.
But there should have been.
Right. So you're preparing always by being a diligent Bible student, by paying attention to, other, lessons that are around you, whether it's, in life, but listening to other preachers, if you're driving down the road, listening to podcasts or sermons and things like that, always pulling ideas, always kind of building up an arsenal in your mind and in your notes so that when it comes time to preach, you've got something. That's why I always say, we do that preacher training camp every year at Oldham Lane, and we take 25 young men from all over the United States and teach them the art of preaching. And one of the things that we say to them always is have a sermon. Always have a sermon in your Bible ready to go so that you're always ready at a moment's notice, perhaps, to preach that sermon. So you have it, it's in your Bible, in your phone or whatever, and you can pull it out. I think that's been a key for me as well, at least before I started doing this, on a regular basis. I always had something that I could pull out of my arsenal, ready to go.
And if it might be a class that you taught months ago or years ago. Pull that out, rework it, refresh it a little bit, or maybe cover something that you didn't get into in the class. I do that as well. And also, there's been times when it might be a sermon you did, and I think, man, that right there, maybe it was something that you was in that one sermon, but it wasn't really a big part of the whole series. But I think, man, that could be a whole class series, or you could do this additional stuff with that topic, that idea for another sermon. And so I'll make notes on that, and or in your own personal Bible study. I think what I do is I have a spiral, and I'll just log the date and and what I read, and then there might be something that I might just copy that verse down that jumps out at me that I think, man, I want to be able to see that if I turn back through my notes, or that might be a good sermon or class idea. So I could flip through that also and get some ideas if I ever wanted to. And so just really anywhere, and it could be someone else's class that they did that you took notes on that was really good, and you thought, and maybe you started turning your Bible and looked at other passages that taught that. Use that. I mean, don't be afraid to pull from and gain from what someone else has done, and pour yourself into it more, or to use something you've done before. Most people don't remember,
right,
and that's okay. We're so afraid to do the same thing again. But if you did that class or that lesson in a different class 2-3 years ago, nobody remembers. Refresh it and do it again.
Absolutely.
And it'll be just as good, and it's already in you, so that's going to help you.
Yeah, that always bothered me early on when I started preaching is, I think, I'm doing this topic again. I've got to find some monumental way to approach it and really knock it out of the park again. But, like baptism, how many different ways can you preach on baptism and the necessity of it or whatever? And then I got to realizing at some point that, I don't necessarily have to make it a goal to give some earth-shattering different way of doing this. Like churches that do communion focus. I've noticed that with talking with gentlemen who come up and give the communion focus. They talk about how it's hard to come up with a new, interesting way to present that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you don't have to.
Yeah. Just read the scriptures.
Maybe just read the scriptures. Maybe just, I mean, and I say that to our folks at Preacher Training Camp, our young men every year. And I've said that in preacher workshops is, you don't have to hit a home run every time. There's great value in just getting on base.
Yeah.
If you can just be a leadoff hitter, the thing with home run hitters, when they hit it over the fence, it's really good, but they strike out a lot too. But a leadoff hitter, they usually have a high on base percentage. They just get on base. They just do their job. And I think as the fill-in preacher, that's a really, for all preachers, but even the fill-in preacher, I think that's a great piece of advice is, just focus on getting on base.
Yeah.
You don't have to hit a home run. Again, you're not just trying to fill in and bide your time till the preacher gets back. But, I think there's great value in just getting on base.
Yeah, I agree. And the more you do something that you can handle, that you're comfortable with, that isn't getting you out in muddy waters that's really beyond the need for you to do or your skill set. It's not too heavy for you. It's just a good, solid sermon that you can manage in terms of topic and the scripture and all that. You're going to be more comfortable with it. It's going to come easier for you because you've got work, family, you've got all these other things. You have only so much time to get this ready. And then you've got to think about the delivery, because once you get up there, the more nervous you are and the less time you have had to prepare and think about your delivery even, the more awkward and uncomfortable you're going to feel.
Right.
And so that affects gestures, that affects your uhs and ums and all those
Sure.
fillers. So if you want to do a good job and feel comfortable, then hopefully you have some advance notice. Get started on that. Plan out your time and get to the end of the sermon. That's a challenge I have is I study it so long that I don't get to the writing the outline early enough sometimes. So I've got to work on that. And you can't just exhaust always everything you could possibly study in that passage.
Right.
But I love the study. But I've got to do that a little faster and then get the rest of it done. But
Yeah.
you'll feel better when you're up there, and it'll come across better.
Yeah, and there's some things that I've always wanted to remember as a guest preacher. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'm a fill-in in that I'm speaking at a summer series and or at another congregation for maybe a gospel meeting or something like that. As that guest speaker, which is basically a fill-in, I never want to be the guy that goes real long.
Yeah.
I don't want to be remembered as, oh yeah, he's that guy.
Yeah.
He's the one that spoke for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the guy that gets remembered for, not being aware of time and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's important to remember. But also, and you kind of hit on it a while ago, I think another thing to remember is as the fill-in guy, don't bite off more than you can chew.
Yeah.
When I don't want the guy filling in for me to start a fire.
Mm-hmm.
So
and then walk away.
Yeah, it's a one-shot deal. Yeah. So I get up there and I start a fire that the elders and the preacher have to put out when he gets back.
Yeah.
For instance, I don't want you preaching on marriage, divorce, and remarriage while I'm gone.
Yeah.
I'd rather you avoid topics like that while I'm gone. Get up there, give a really good sermon, knock it out of the park, get on base, whatever, but avoid starting fires and getting so deep or biting off more than you can chew. If we're talking about, guys that are filling in for the preacher when he's gone and they're just a regular member in the congregation, they're not on staff, or maybe they're a deacon or whatever, I think it takes a lot to stand up there and to deliver when you don't do it every week.
Yeah.
Don't make it more complicated by biting off more than you can chew. Mm-hmm. Start with something and start there and deliver just a really good message on that. Something else that you've said is do your job, not the preacher's job. What do you mean by that?
Well, like what you said, I see it as, even though I'm a minister with the church, it's not my role, not that I should not be prepared to address this. It is not my role typically to address from the pulpit marriage, divorce, remarriage, certain tougher topics like that. Now, there wouldn't be any issue if I wanted to give a good old-fashioned sermon on baptism or something like, but just have some awareness that that's not within the scope of what I do. Mm-hmm. Even being a minister at the church, that stuff you cover.
Not that you couldn't.
Not that I couldn't, but that just to me is not necessarily inappropriate, but just not the etiquette. That's something that needs to be left for you to do, unless we talked about it. Right. And so I think just be really sensitive to that. Whether you're full time or whether you're a member filling in at the church, is be mindful of that. What might be more typically the preacher's territory and expected to handle, and probably steer clear of that unless there's a conversation about that.
Absolutely.
And maybe you are particularly skilled at handling that, and maybe the preacher and the elders would like for you to handle that. Mm-hmm. Maybe you are like in fact, I was talking to someone who's at another congregation, and they have a full-time minister who handles their counseling and marriage and family kind of stuff, and he'll fill in and speak on those type of topics.
Yeah.
Well, that's appropriate, and that's an understood thing that they have. So you're not that preacher to do that kind of thing. Your job is to fill in. Let him do his job. You do your job. Your job is just give the folks a good, solid edifying message.
Yeah.
Challenge them too, but just a good message.
Yeah, we're not saying that we want the congregation to hear a watered down lesson. Or
don't do that.
Or that you're the guy that, is not much is expected of you. You know?
Don't do that. And we do that to youth ministers too. We think, well, he's just going to get up and kind of be jokey and entertain. No, I think youth ministers need to bring meat to the table, because so often we think of them as lightweights. And I remember one of my college professors challenging us. He just all of a sudden in class said, okay, I want 5 scriptures on baptism, call them out. And so everybody's sitting there, trying to, pull them up in their mind and go to them and call them out. That was a good exercise to say, people in the church are going to think you're lightweights. Biblically. Yeah. And so when you're the youth minister or not the preacher, as a minister, especially in the way I see it, is come to the table with substance, but don't get into his role. Stay in your lane. You know?
Right.
So, and I think that's important for youth ministers. That doesn't mean you have to get up and entertain the kids and be jokey. Provide a good, solid message biblically, and that's going to carry a lot of weight with the church. That you're going to earn credibility.
Sure.
And they're going to respect that, and they're going to appreciate that, because you're the guy teaching their youth.
Right.
They want to know you can handle the word. So show them.
It's concerning to me when I hear a young man say, well, I'm going to go into youth ministry because I don't like preaching.
Yeah.
I'm like, you may not want to preach on a regular basis, but that needs to be part of your repertoire.
Paul was the preacher to the Gentiles, Peter to the Jews. You're the preacher to the youth.
Yeah. Right.
So if you think of yourself as a preacher and maybe a different specific way, then that helps kind of clarify how you go about your ministry.
It's interesting to me that after you or Blake or David fills in for me while I'm gone, I'll always have somebody come up to me and say, oh, you better watch it. He's going to take your job, and of course, I know what they're saying. They're just joking. But I'm like, we're on the same team, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm the one that was instrumental in bringing Jake on board, or, Blake, David, whoever, because I want them on our team because we're better with them on our team. Yeah. But it kind of highlights something that I think is important, is for, to be all of us being on the same page, reading from the same script, delivering the same message, just in different ways. I think that is really, really good when you've got a staff that can do that. Yeah. That, the youth minister steps in and he preaches and they're like, oh, wow. Like, he's not your typical youth minister. Yeah. He could preach. Or when, the associate steps in, you're like, well, he could be preaching somewhere. Yeah, that's exactly what we want. We don't want to miss a beat here. But
because then people find out, oh, Chris ain't going to be here.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want that.
You don't want to step down, know.
And we've got other guys that are not on staff that we can call on
absolutely.
too.
Absolutely. That's a real blessing. Yeah. But there's something else that you hit on that I think is important for the fill-in guy to understand, for lack of a better phrase, the fill-in guy. And that is, don't try to be the preacher. Yeah. Don't try to emulate him. Yeah. You're your own person.
Be yourself.
And that's something I had to learn early on. I can remember as a kid, my best friend had an uncle who was a country music singer, performer. And we'd go to his house and we'd listen to him perform, and whether it was Randy Travis, George Strait, or whoever else, he tried to sing like they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, he tried to sound like Randy Travis. He was a poor man's Randy Travis, and I'm like, he'd be a lot better if he'd just sing like he knows how.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing here. You don't have to emulate, the preacher. I think that was a key for me starting out in preaching, is learning I don't have to be this person or that person. Mm-hmm. I can just be me. And that was very freeing. It was very liberating to know, hey, I've got my own style and my own persona in the pulpit. And so I think that's a key too. And you've said that. Don't try to be the preacher.
Yeah, be yourself. And the more you get your preparation done, so that get to the point where you can just go over that lesson, go over that outline, the more it's going to be in you, and the more free you're going to be from the notes, the more comfortable you're going to feel up there, which means the more you're going to be yourself.
Yeah.
because you're already going to be nervous.
Right.
You're already going to be nervous. And so get to the point where you can you can feel more, as much yourself and comfortable as possible. And it's people can love their preacher to death, just absolutely love him, but it's still good for the church to have that break.
Yes.
And so if you're trying to copy and be just like the preacher, everybody knows you're not being yourself, and it hinders your message, I think. But you're not really giving people the break that they need. It's just good to change that up a little bit. And so you be yourself, and they're going to love it. And then the preacher comes back, and everything's fine.
Absolutely.
So just be, but the more comfortable you feel, that's really important. And some people are fine with a large crowd, but they're nervous about a small crowd. Some are the other way around. Some are just scared to death no matter what.
Right.
And some it doesn't matter. But so think about your crowd size too, and you don't want to be tied to your notes. And that's another point for the fill-in guys. You don't want to be tied to your notes as much as possible. So get to the point where you can be a little more free from that.
I think so. I think it's a really good thing, excuse me, that when I'm gone, the people who take my place, whether it's you or David or whoever, are different than me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's key.
It's good for the church.
It is, and it's good for me. It's good for everybody. I don't want somebody filling in for me that's just like me. Mm-hmm. I think it's good. So. Jake, we're wrapping up here. What other words of wisdom do you have? What other word of advice would you give to the fill-in preacher?
Well, another thing is, like, this is, people talk about this in preaching, is be careful with humor. I mean, your humor can be a tool that's helpful if used correctly in a sermon, but your job is not to get up there and do. Some people think, well, I got to do an icebreaker kind of jokey thing at the beginning. Don't. Just get up there and welcome everybody and thank you for the opportunity. And maybe you have a story or some illustration at the beginning. That's fine. But just get into it. Just relax and get into it. Get to the text and get to the point.
Yeah.
And don't do anything else. And you will do a good job if you'll do it that way, and people will want to utilize you again.
I think that in most of our congregations, I can't speak for all of them, obviously, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that my assumption would be at most of our congregations, they have a lot of grace for the fill-in guy.
Yeah, for sure.
I think people are more than willing to say, okay, this is someone who doesn't do this full time. They may have some slip-ups, they may have some difficulties here and there because they're nervous or whatever, but we're going to give a lot of grace here. It's kind of like that, young man that's learning to lead singing.
Yeah.
You give a lot of grace there because you understand, half the battle is just getting over your nerves.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of leeway that is given, a lot of grace that's given, and if there's not, there should be. But I think there usually is.
And just know afterwards, most people are going to say, "Good job, thank you." Just say, "I appreciate that." Don't let it go to your head. People may say stuff because it doesn't come out right and they're trying to say something else. Don't let that bother you. Someone may say, "Well, you said that word wrong," or "You said verse 37 and it was 38. Okay, fine. Just let it roll off your back. It's no big deal." Because members say, you were talking about what people say sometimes, and I remember what they should have just said was, "Thank you for the lesson.
Sure.
I appreciate it." What they said was, "Well, you're not Chris, but you're second, and but you're not a bad second, but you're not first." And just
keep
say,
piling on.
Just say, "Hey, appreciate the message, brother." That's all you got to say.
I think so. Maybe that's another podcast episode.
Yeah.
What to say to the preacher
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jake, for joining us today, and thank everyone for tuning in. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got other comments or questions about this topic or any topic that we've discussed, certainly we'd love to hear from you. You can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. I hope you'll tune in next week as we talk more about ministry matters and preaching matters. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.